The significance of the Good Friday Agreement's 25th anniversary is obvious by who's been here and what's been said.
Supporting the people of Northern Ireland, protecting the peace, preserving the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is a priority for Democrats and Republicans alike in the United States.
We had a visit from US President Joe Biden. He encouraged politicians in Northern Ireland to restore power sharing, addressed the Irish Parliament in Dublin, and retraced his ancestral roots. And now one of the driving forces behind the Good Friday Agreement, Bill Clinton, is visiting too. He'll be addressing students alongside Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Senator George Mitchell, the man who brokered the historic compromise, will be in town too. I'm David Blevins, Senior Ireland Correspondent in Belfast, and this is the Sky News Daily. 25 years on, I've been speaking to one of the leaders behind the Good Friday Agreement, former Prime Minister Tony Blair, whose pragmatism helped push the parties to one of the most historic peace agreements ever.
A day like today, I mean, it's not a day for sort of sound bites, really. We can leave those at home, but I feel the hand of history upon our shoulder.
Tony Blair, people talk a lot about the spirit of 1998. How would you define the spirit of 1998 when the agreement was struck?
There was just a huge moment of hope. It's very hard for people now to just think back on those times, and a lot of people were either very young or not even born at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. But you know, when I was growing up, to a degree, probably when you were growing up, the Troubles, as we called them, were the thing that defined Northern Ireland, defined its politics. Every day you would hear stories on the news of fresh acts of terrorism or violence and killing, assassination. It was, and the Northern Ireland itself was just disfigured by this, unable to move forward, unable to create in Belfast the type of thriving city it is today. So it was the signing of the agreement. We were probably naive to think that would be it. You know, we'd sign the agreement, and I always thought it was going to be a process and not just an event. But I mean, it took us, frankly, another almost 10 years to put it fully in place.
Was it fate, or was there a strategy?
It was a combination of the right circumstances, and I think we had the right strategy. So we had a political framework that made sense, which was republicanism and nationalism, accepting that Northern Ireland would remain a part of the UK for as long as the majority of people in Northern Ireland wanted it. And in return for that, there had to be reform of institutions and proper justice and equality for those people that weren't unionist or Protestant, if you like. So there was a political strategy at the heart that made sense, but also the context, the circumstances were such as we approached the 21st century that people were exhausted and wanted peace.
In those crucial 24 hours or 48 hours perhaps leading up to the agreement, are there 2 or 3 moments in your mind which you consider to be definitive, that you will always remember?
Well, I remember all of the negotiation because it stretched actually over 3 days, and it was agonizing because it was constantly, the agreement was on and then it was off. I mean, it was mostly off, by the way. And the 2 things that stand out for me are, number one, when I arrived, and I remember Senator Mitchell, George Mitchell, saying to me at the time, look, I think this is hopeless. And a lot of people felt the same who were with me. And right at the very end, when David Trimble called me and said, okay, we can go with this. And then we were out and away with it. But between those two moments was just, it's just unimaginably difficult.
When I spoke to Bertie Ahern last week, he shared how at one stage he met with loyalist paramilitary leaders in Northern Ireland in the days leading up to the agreement. Were there conversations you were involved in that you've never spoken about in the run-up to the agreement?
Yeah, there was quite a few very private and difficult conversations. I mean, the loyalists, David Irvine, who sadly passed away now, was very important. He was a highly intelligent, capable man. And of course, we were constantly engaged with the Republicans. And really, part of it was trying to make sense of the opposing narratives of why we had reached this position, and then trying to bridge the gap of trust that there was between those two opposing narratives and two opposing factions. And in that, the engagement with frankly, the people of violence was important. And it gave me a sense also of what was possible, because I could see after that engagement that even though there were these completely differing views as to how we got here, nonetheless there was a joint determination to try and get out of where we were if possible.
You talk about David Irvine. We hear a lot about the men behind the agreement: Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern, Senator Mitchell, John Hume, David Trimble. But there was a woman, of course, who played an instrumental role, Mo Mowlam. How significant was her contribution as Northern Ireland Secretary?
So I think that Mo's contribution was immense because of what she represented, not because of any individual item she negotiated, but because she was a complete culture shock. And, for those of us who had lived through successive, very conservative looking, very conservative, big C and small c looking men who were secretaries of state for Northern Ireland, a lot of them decent folk, but, they were archetypal British politicians. And suddenly in steps Mo, who was the complete opposite of an archetypal politician. It had its own impact on showing people that we were in a different world. And in particular, I think for the Republican and nationalist community, it showed them there was another side to Britain, and that maybe Britain was changing as a country, which of course we were. And Mo was in many ways a representative of that. So her contribution was part of what created the context in which people felt, maybe the times are changing, maybe it's different, maybe we can give this a go.
How important was the phone call from President Clinton during the night? Would you have got over the line without the intervention of the President?
I think Bill Clinton was really important because he was President of the United States, so that matters. Whatever side of the fence you're on in this dispute, people listen to the President of the United States. The Republicans have to listen to him. The Unionists respect the presidency. So he was important for that reason. But he was important more because he had this extraordinary political intuition. So I literally, I would phone him at any time of the day and night, and he'd be completely switched on. And the thing was, you didn't have to explain the politics of the situation to him. He got it instinctively, immediately, and therefore it wasn't just that he was calling people, but he was calling people with a lot of craft in what the call entailed and the way he put things and framed them for the different sides. So he was extremely important in it, and I was really lucky to have him as a partner.
Do you appreciate the magnitude of what was achieved on Good Friday 1998 more now than you did even then? I suppose what I'm asking is, do you feel the hand of history a little heavier on your shoulder?
No, I think the thing is, at the time, I was aware it was important. But straight afterwards, I was due to go for a family holiday in Spain. And it was only when I was literally with my family, and my kids were still young at the time, walking down the street in Cordoba, where we'd gone to stay with friends. And people would stop me, Spanish people would stop me in the street and start talking about it, that I started to think, this is actually not just a big deal for the UK, it's a globally significant agreement. And then in later times, as you, particularly having been involved also in the Israeli-Palestinian issue, you realize actually I can't think really of another major peace process that's been brought to a clear fruition. So I think now I'm probably more aware of it than then. But you've got to keep it the whole time, and you've got to preserve it, and it's still got its fragility.
And has it passed its sell-by date? 25 years later, is it time to think about something other than mandatory coalition, for example?
I don't think the time's right for that. I think you've still got to have The Good Friday Agreement took account of the very specific circumstances of Northern Ireland, and those specific circumstances are still there. You can see it in the politics. Now, I do believe in time, by the way, there is a new generation coming through in Northern Ireland that will think less about whether you're a Republican, a nationalist, or a unionist, and will think more about what's the best economic future, how do we raise our children in peace and security with opportunity. So it maybe in time things change, but at the moment, no. I think the basic contours of the agreement are still necessary to maintain stability.
You talk about that coming in time. Obviously, the agreement to some extent silenced the guns and the bombs, or largely silenced them, but it hasn't produced the reconciliation that was hoped for. How disappointed are you about that?
It takes a long time for people to reconcile. I mean, all of the people who are engaged at the top of Northern Ireland politics now are still people with the long memory of the past. And of course, you've got to be, I was always very clear with people about the Good Friday Agreement. The central question, United Kingdom or United Ireland, is unresolved. So that in itself will cause some tension. And then, more recently, we've had the Brexit issue and then the Northern Ireland Protocol and so on. So it's not surprising to me. I mean, I'd like to see it happen over time, and hopefully over time it will. But I think, for those of us who grew up living through that period, I mean, these distrusts go very, very deep, and reconciling them is the work probably of several generations.
You say it's unresolved. How capable are the political leaders of today of grasping the nuances of Northern Ireland and helping to resolve it?
You see, the view I had, and this is where, without going into all the Brexit divisions, Europe was important because, in a way, with the Republic of Ireland and the UK both in Europe together, both working together in Europe, my view was always that one of the things the Good Friday Agreement did was it just made the border less practically important. I mean, constitutionally significant, but less practically important. And the trouble is the Brexit thing has put it back on the agenda as an issue of practicality, because now it's the north-south border is the external border of the European Union. So I think the best thing for political leaders today is to remember, if they think the peace has been a good thing, remember this one principle, which is actually a principle about leadership. It only came about because of leadership. It only came about because there were leaders prepared to be unpopular, even with their own grassroots constituency or part of it. And it only came about because there were leaders with the creativity and the imagination to say whatever the obstacles, we're going to find a way through it, and they found it. So that's there are many different lessons of the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement. And one of them is about leadership, not specifically Northern Ireland or specifically the conflict, but about leadership. And that's what I would urge the people who are in positions of political leadership today to reflect upon.
I have just one final question. When Senator Mitchell uttered those 19 words, I'm pleased to announce that the two governments and the political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement. How did you feel in that moment?
I always say to people, there are so few moments in politics where you are in a celebratory mood. So few moments that you remember those and remember them for all of your life, and this was one of them. Perhaps, certainly, the most joyful moment I ever had in my time in office.
My thanks to Tony Blair and to you for listening to the Sky News Daily with me, David Blevins. If you want to hear more from Northern Ireland and the Republic, do scroll back in this feed and listen to our other episodes, including where we ask, why do so many US presidents like to say, I'm Irish?